Rebecca Harris stood in the loading bay of Earth's main postal hub, running her scanner over the last box one more time. The device beeped green. Good. Everything was accounted for. She lifted the package, surprisingly light for its size, and placed it carefully on her hover cart between two larger containers marked fragile, and a stack of what looked like birthday presents wrapped in shiny purple paper. 23 years. That's how long she'd been doing this job. 23 years of early mornings, sore feet, and the occasional angry dog. 23 years of rain, snow, heat waves, and that one time she delivered mail during a meteor shower on Colony Station 6. In all that time, through every possible complication the universe could throw at her, she had never once missed a deadline. Not a single time. She wasn't about to start now. Becky, hold up a second. She turned to see Tom Matthews jogging toward her, his supervisor badge bouncing against his chest. Tom was a good guy, bit of a worrier, but his heart was in the right place. He'd been with the Postal Service almost as long as she had, though he'd moved up to management 5 years back. Less walking, more paperwork. Rebecca didn't envy him one bit. Tom reached her cart and put his hands on his hips, breathing hard. He really needed to use the gym membership the company provided. "You sure about this route?" he asked, squinting at the manifest on his datapad. His finger traced the delivery path, and his frown deepened with each centimeter. "This goes straight through Dracovarian territory. Like right through the heart of it." Rebecca pulled off her cap, ran a hand through her graying hair and put it back on. "Yep. Saw that when I got the assignment this morning." "Those dragon folks," Tom continued, lowering his voice even though they were alone in the bay, "they don't exactly throw parties when humans show up. I heard about a cargo crew last month, got held at the border for 6 hours just because one guy forgot to fill out Form 27B in triplicate." 6 hours, Becky. She shrugged and grabbed the handles of her hover cart. The anti-grav system hummed to life, lifting the weight off the ground. "Mail's gotta get delivered, Tom. Says so right in my contract. Section 5, paragraph 3. I looked it up when I took this job back in '02. Tom sighed, knowing he'd lost this argument before it even started. "Just, be careful, okay? Those dragons, they've been running that empire for thousands of years. They don't think much of us humans. We're like new kids at school to them. New kids they barely tolerate." "I'll be fine," Rebecca assured him, giving the cart a test push. It glided smoothly. "I'm just delivering packages, not starting a war. Besides, what are they gonna do? Nobody messes with the mail. It's practically sacred." She meant it too. Throughout human history, through every civilization and culture, mail carriers had a kind of unofficial immunity. You didn't shoot the messenger. You didn't delay the post. It was one of those unwritten rules that everybody seemed to understand even if they couldn't explain why. The journey to the border took about 3 hours through the neutral shipping lanes. Rebecca used the time to reorganize her cart, double-check addresses, and eat the sandwich she'd packed that morning. Turkey and cheese, nothing fancy. She listened to her favorite radio station. Oldies from Earth, mostly country and rock from the late 20th century. Her dad had loved that music. She'd grown up hearing it every Sunday morning while he made pancakes. When the Dracovarian border station came into view, even Rebecca had to admit it was impressive. She'd seen pictures, sure, but pictures didn't do it justice. The station was massive, easily the size of a small moon, built from some kind of black stone that seemed to swallow light. Obsidian maybe, or something like it. The surface was covered in carvings, symbols and glyphs that probably told the history of the empire. They looked old. Really old. The kind of old that made humanity's few centuries of space travel seem like an eye blink. Guard towers jutted out at regular intervals, and ships, sleek, dangerous-looking things that bristled with weapons, patrolled in precise patterns. Everything about the place screamed power and authority. This was not a civilization you wanted to mess with. Rebecca guided her hover cart toward the customs entrance, a huge archway that could have fit a cargo hauler with room to spare. As she got closer, she could see the guards. Dragons. Real, actual dragons. The nearest one was at least 40 feet tall, standing on 4 legs with wings folded against its back. Its scales looked like polished bronze that caught the light from the nearby star and threw it back in shifting patterns. Horns curved back from its head, and its eyes. Those eyes were something else. They were huge, golden, with vertical slits for pupils. When it looked at her, Rebecca felt like she was being examined by something ancient and impossibly intelligent. Those eyes had probably seen things she couldn't imagine. Civilizations rise and fall. Stars born and die. The dragon's head lowered as she approached, bringing that massive face level with her position on the cart. She could feel heat radiating from its nostrils. One breath and her cart, and probably her, would be nothing but ash. Rebecca stopped the cart, set the brake and reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out her postal credentials, a simple card with her photo, employee number, and the official seal of the Earth Postal Service. She held it up so the dragon could see it clearly. "Morning," she said, keeping her voice friendly but professional. "Got a delivery for Outpost 7. Just passing through your territory. Should take me about 6 hours, then I'll be out of your way." The dragon stared at her. Its massive head tilted slightly to one side, and Rebecca could have sworn she saw confusion in those ancient eyes. Several long seconds passed. She could hear the hum of the station's power systems, the distant clank of machinery, the whisper of her own breathing inside her helmet. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the dragon stepped aside. The archway behind it lit up green, the universal signal for "proceed." Rebecca nodded her thanks, released the brake and pushed her cart forward. As she passed under the archway, she started whistling. It was an old Johnny Cash song, "I've Been Everywhere." Seemed appropriate given her job. Her dad used to play it on road trips when she was a kid. She had no idea that behind her, the dragon stood frozen, staring after her with an expression of utter bewilderment. She didn't see the other guards gathering, their voices rising in rapid, confused conversation in their own language. She didn't notice the emergency comm that went out to the palace, flagged as urgent. Rebecca Harris, mail carrier, just kept walking. She had deliveries to make, and she was already 20 minutes behind schedule. Lord Varanth was not accustomed to feeling small. In his 473 years of life, he had commanded entire battle fleets across 6 star systems. He had led the charge against the Krell swarm when they threatened the outer colonies, personally turning their invasion ships into floating debris with his fire. He had stood alone against the champion of Andrus Prime, a warrior who had never lost a single combat, and walked away victorious while his opponent's broken armor cooled on the sand. Songs were sung about him in the great halls. Children learned his name in their history lessons. Other dragons, even the noble houses, spoke his name with respect bordering on reverence. He was, by any reasonable measure, a living legend among his people. That's what made this moment so utterly confusing. Varanth had been meditating in his private garden, as he did every afternoon. The garden was his sanctuary, a place of carefully arranged stones and flowing water, where ancient trees provided shade and the air smelled of mineral-rich soil. He came here to think, to process the weight of his long life, to find the stillness that escaped him during his duties at court. Today he'd been contemplating a philosophical text about the nature of honor when he'd heard the soft whir of machinery. He opened one eye lazily. Probably just a maintenance drone doing its rounds. Nothing to concern himself with. But it wasn't a drone. A human was walking along the path that bordered his garden. A woman, small even by human standards, wearing some kind of blue uniform with a cap pulled low over her eyes. She was pushing a cart, one of those hover carts that floated a few inches off the ground, loaded with boxes and packages of various sizes. Varanth watched with mild curiosity. Humans were rare in this part of the Empire. Most stayed in their designated zones, nervous about venturing too deep into Dracovarian space. This one seemed completely unconcerned, humming some tune to herself as she consulted a handheld device. Then something happened that Varanth would spend the next several days trying to understand. As the human woman drew closer, still not even looking in his direction, Varanth felt his head begin to lower. It wasn't a conscious decision. His muscles simply moved on their own, bowing his great head down until his snout was nearly touching the ground. His wings, which had been partially extended to catch the afternoon sun, folded tight against his body. His tail, which normally rested in a proud curve, tucked itself close to his legs. Every single muscle in his ancient, powerful body was screaming the same message. Make yourself smaller, less noticeable, less threatening, don't draw attention, don't make eye contact, stay very still. Varanth's mind, the same mind that had calculated fleet movements and battle strategies, that had outsmarted enemies and negotiated treaties, was trying desperately to understand what was happening. His body was reacting to a threat. But what threat? This creature was barely taller than his foreleg. If he wanted to, he could reduce her to ash with a single breath. She had no visible weapons, no armor, no guards. She was pushing a cart full of boxes for the love of the first fire. Yet every instinct he possessed, instincts buried so deep he hadn't even known they existed, was telling him that this small, soft-skinned being was the most dangerous thing he'd encountered in 300 years. His heart, which normally beat slow and steady, was hammering in his chest. His pupils had dilated. His breathing had gone shallow. These were fear responses. He recognized them intellectually, though he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually felt them. Perhaps during his first battle? Maybe when he was still young and foolish? The human woman stopped walking. She was looking down at her device, frowning slightly. Then she glanced up and seemed to notice him for the first time. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice bright and friendly. She walked closer to the garden's edge, completely unafraid. "Don't suppose you know which way to the transit hub? My scanner's saying it should be around here somewhere, but I think I might have taken a wrong turn back at the fountain." Varenth tried to speak. He wanted to ask her what power she wielded that could make him feel this way. He wanted to demand answers. His voice, the same voice that had bellowed commands across battlefields, that had roared challenges that echoed across canyons, came out as barely more than a whisper. 3 levels down, he managed, his throat tight. "West corridor. Follow the blue markers." The human smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and grateful, the kind you'd give a helpful stranger who'd given you directions in a new city. "Thanks. Really appreciate it. This place is like a maze, beautiful but definitely a maze." She gave him a little wave, actually waved at him as if he were just another pedestrian on the street, and continued pushing her cart along the path. Within moments she'd rounded a corner and disappeared from view, her humming fading into the distance. Only then did Varentha's body relax. His head rose slowly. His wings unfolded. His tail uncurled. He stood there in his meditation garden, surrounded by centuries-old trees and carefully placed stones, and stared at his own front claws. They were trembling. Actually trembling, like he was a fresh hatchling facing his first storm. What in the name of the first fire had just happened? He looked down the path where the human had gone, half expecting her to reappear, to reveal herself as some kind of shapeshifter or mind controller. But there was nothing. Just empty pathway and dappled sunlight. Varenth had faced armies. Had stared down opponents twice his size. Had flown through weapons fire that could tear ships apart. He had earned every scar on his scales, every title attached to his name. And a small human woman with a cart full of packages had just made him bow without saying a word, without even trying, without apparently knowing what she'd done. He stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. The philosophical text lay forgotten on his reading stone. Meditation was impossible now. His mind was racing, turning over the encounter again and again, searching for an explanation that made sense. Finally he did something he rarely did. He pulled out his comm device and sent a message to the palace. To the Empress herself. "Your Radiance," he wrote, choosing his words carefully. "We may have a problem. A significant one. I need to speak with you immediately about the humans. Specifically about what they truly are." The message reached the Imperial Palace just before the evening council session was set to begin. It came through on the priority channel, the one reserved for genuine emergencies, invasions, natural disasters, diplomatic crises. The kind of channel that nobody used lightly because false alarms resulted in serious consequences. When the communications officer saw Lord Varentha's name attached to the message, she immediately flagged it for the Empress. Varenth didn't panic. Varenth didn't exaggerate. If he said something was urgent, you listened. Empress Kalira was in her private study, reviewing trade agreements with the outer colonies, when her personal assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. That alone told her something was wrong. Her assistant, a younger dragon named Petra who'd served the palace for 20 years, knew better than to interrupt unless it was truly important. "Your Radiance," Petra said, her voice tight. "Lord Varenth has sent an emergency communication. He's requesting an immediate audience. He says it concerns the humans." Kalira set down the document she'd been reading. "The humans? What about them? Did one of their ships violate our borders again?" "He didn't specify, Your Radiance. Just said it was urgent and that you needed to hear it directly from him." Within the hour, Varenth was standing in the throne room, and Kalira could see immediately that something had shaken him. His scales looked dull, his eyes were unfocused, and his usual perfect posture seemed slightly off. This was not the composed war hero she knew. He told her everything. About the human woman with the cart. About the involuntary bow. About the fear that had gripped him, primal and undeniable. About how his own body had betrayed him without his permission. Kalira listened in silence. When he finished, she sat back on her throne, her mind working through the implications. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that a human mail carrier made you, Lord Varenth the Unburned, submit to her without even speaking to you?" "Not in greeting," Varenth clarified, his voice strained. "Not in respect. My body recognized her as a predator. As something to fear. I've never felt anything like it, Your Radiance." Before Kalira could respond, another message came through. Then another. Then a flood of them. Lord Hastings from the Garden District reported the same experience. So did Commander Voss, who'd encountered the human near the transit station. Lady Morgana, a scholar who'd lived for 600 years and had written 17 books on courage and honor, admitted in a shaking voice that she'd pressed herself against a wall when the human passed, trying to make herself invisible. Every single report described the same human. Rebecca Harris. A postal worker. 47 years old. No military training. No weapons. No apparent awareness of what she was doing to every dragon she encountered. General Thorne, Kalira's senior military advisor, stood beside the throne reading the reports as they came in. He was an old dragon, scarred from countless battles, with scales that had turned almost silver with age. Kalira had never seen him look worried before. He looked worried now. "Your Radiance," he said quietly, "we have reports coming in from across the Garden District, the commercial sector and the transit levels. This human is following a delivery route. Just walking through our territory with her cart, scanning packages, apparently humming songs to herself. And everywhere she goes. Everywhere she goes our people bow," Kalira finished. Her talons scraped against the armrest of her throne, leaving thin grooves in the ancient metal. The sound echoed in the vast chamber. More reports arrived as the day wore on. A warrior who'd fought in the border wars found himself backing away from the human when she asked him for directions. A merchant, someone who dealt with dozens of species daily and prided himself on his composure, described feeling an overwhelming urge to flee when she stopped to check her map near his shop. A group of young dragons, barely into their second century, had actually hidden behind a fountain when they saw her coming. What made it worse, what made it truly disturbing, was that the human seemed completely oblivious. According to every witness, she was polite, cheerful even. She thanked people who helped her. She apologized when her cart got in someone's way. She hummed old Earth songs and consulted her scanner and went about her business like she was walking through any normal city on any normal day. She had no idea that she was terrifying some of the most powerful beings in this sector of the galaxy. Kalira called an emergency council session. Within 2 hours, her throne room was filled with the Empire's leadership. Military commanders, scientific advisors, noble house representatives, intelligence officers. Everyone who mattered was there, and everyone had heard at least some version of the story. "Theories?" Kalira demanded, looking around the assembled crowd. "I want theories. Now." "Perhaps it's a weapon," suggested Admiral Grenth, a massive red dragon who commanded the Third Fleet. "Some kind of technology the humans developed. Fear projection maybe. Mind control. Our sensors would have detected that," countered Dr. Lin, the Empire's chief scientist. She was smaller than most dragons, her scales a pale green. "I've reviewed the security footage. This human is carrying a standard comm device, a delivery scanner and nothing else. No hidden tech. No energy signatures beyond normal background radiation." "Then what?" Kalira's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "What could possibly make Lord Varanth, a dragon who's faced down entire armies, bow to a creature who's delivering packages?" The room fell silent. Nobody had an answer. "Where is this human now?" Kalira asked. General Thorne consulted his datapad. "Still on her route, Your Radiance. She's made 17 deliveries so far. She has 23 more scheduled before she reaches the border checkpoint. At her current pace, she'll be done in approximately 6 hours." Kalira stood, her full height making the throne seem small behind her. "I want our best researchers on this. Xenobiologists, evolutionary specialists, anyone who understands how different species instincts work. I want access to every piece of data we have on human biology, human history, human psychology. And I want answers before this Rebecca Harris reaches our border." "Your Radiance," Dr. Lin spoke up carefully, "may I ask why this is such a priority?" "She's just one human. She'll be gone soon." Kalira turned to face the scientist, and her eyes held something that might have been fear. "Because, Doctor, if one human mail carrier, someone with no training, no weapons, no apparent intent to intimidate, can make our finest warriors submit through sheer presence alone, what happens if humanity decides they don't like us? What happens if they send soldiers instead of postal workers? What could they do if they actually tried?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Around the room, dragons who'd spent lifetimes believing in their empire's strength, in their own power and superiority, suddenly felt very small. Somewhere in the Garden District, Rebecca Harris delivered package number 18 to a grateful recipient, checked it off on her scanner, and headed toward her next stop. She was running about 15 minutes behind schedule now, but she'd make it up. She always did. Dr. Frank Coleman was having a pretty good day until his comm device started beeping with an emergency priority code. He was in his lab on Research Station Gamma, 3 levels below the surface of the Dracovarian capital world, running tests on plant samples from a newly discovered moon. It was quiet work, the kind he enjoyed. No drama, no politics, just science. Frank had been working with the Dracovarian scientific community for almost 6 years now. He was one of only a handful of human xenobiologists who'd been granted access to their research facilities. It had taken him 3 years just to get the security clearance, another year to earn their trust. Dragons didn't open their doors to outsiders easily, but Frank had proven himself through patient, careful work. He studied evolutionary biology, specifically how different species developed similar traits in response to their environments. Fascinating stuff if you were into that sort of thing. So when the urgent request came through from the Imperial Palace itself, Frank's first thought was that maybe they'd found some interesting fossil or wanted his opinion on an archaeological discovery. The message was brief and direct. Analyze human biology immediately, with specific focus on locomotion patterns and hunting behavior. Send all findings to Empress Kalira's office within 4 hours. Frank blinked at his screen. That was oddly specific. Why would they suddenly care about how humans walked and hunted? He'd offered to share this kind of information dozens of times over the years, and they'd always politely declined, saying it wasn't relevant to their current projects. Still, when the Empress herself asks for something, you don't question it. You just do it. Frank started pulling up his research files, organizing data on human evolutionary history, skeletal structure, muscle composition. He had all this information already. It was part of his basic comparative database, so it shouldn't take long to compile a report. Then his screen pinged with a new message. Attached were security files, marked with the highest classification level. Frank's clearance was just barely high enough to access them. He opened the first file and found himself watching surveillance footage from various locations around the capital. The footage showed a human woman, middle-aged, wearing what looked like a postal uniform, pushing a hover cart through different areas. Garden districts, commercial zones, transit stations. Nothing unusual at first glance. Just someone going about their work. But then Frank noticed the dragons in the footage. Every single one that came near the woman reacted the same way. Their heads would lower. Their wings would fold tight against their bodies. Their whole posture would change, becoming smaller, less aggressive. Some of them actually backed away from her, or pressed themselves against walls, or took alternate routes to avoid crossing her path. The woman in the footage seemed completely unaware. She was checking packages, humming to herself, occasionally stopping to ask for directions. Just a normal person doing a normal job. Frank watched clip after clip. A massive warrior dragon, armor gleaming, weapons at his side, practically cowering when the woman walked past. A scholar, ancient and dignified, suddenly finding urgent business in the opposite direction. A group of young dragons literally hiding behind a decorative fountain. Oh no, Frank muttered, his stomach sinking as realization hit him. Oh no no no. He pulled up his comparative biology charts, the ones he'd spent years developing. Split-screen displays showing evolutionary trees, predator-prey relationships, instinctual response patterns. His hands were moving fast now, pulling data, cross-referencing, confirming what his gut was already telling him. He reached for his comm and did something he never thought he'd do. He requested a direct line to the Empress. To his surprise, the connection went through immediately. Apparently, they'd been waiting for his call. Dr. Coleman, Kalira's voice came through, tight with tension. Tell me you have answers. Frank took a breath. This was going to be a difficult conversation. Your Radiance, I think I understand what's happening. Can I ask you something first? Dragons evolved from ambush predators, correct? Your hunting strategy is based on burst speed, overwhelming force, then retreat to rest and conserve energy. This is known, Kalira said, and Frank could hear impatience in her voice. Every hatchling learns this. We strike hard and fast, then withdraw. It's how we've always hunted. What does this have to do with? Everything, Frank interrupted, then immediately regretted it. You didn't interrupt an Empress. But she didn't reprimand him, so he continued. Your Radiance, humans are completely different. We're endurance hunters. It's what we evolved to do. We're not fast. A dragon could outrun a human easily in a sprint. We're not particularly strong either. But we have one ability that's genuinely terrifying if you think about it. Which is? We don't stop. Frank pulled up a chart showing human migration patterns from ancient Earth. Ever? Our ancestors didn't chase prey by being faster or stronger. They chased it by literally following it for days. Sometimes weeks. There are documented cases of human hunters tracking an animal for over 100 miles, just walking after it, never stopping, never giving up. The prey would run, exhaust itself, try to rest. But the humans would catch up. So the prey would run again. And again. Eventually it would collapse from sheer exhaustion and the humans would just walk up to it. Silence on the other end of the line. Frank continued, pulling up more data. We can track anything. We can see patterns invisible to other species. We can adjust our strategy on the fly. And most importantly, we have this psychological trait where we become more determined when something gets difficult. Other species give up when the cost gets too high. Humans double down. We get stubborn. There's an old Earth saying, you can't outrun humans because they'll follow you home. You're describing a nightmare, Kalira said quietly. From a prey species perspective? Yeah, we kind of are. Frank switched to another file, one showing comparative anatomy. Your instincts, your radiance, they're buried deep in your brain, in the parts that evolved millions of years before civilization. Those instincts are designed to keep you alive by recognizing threats. And when a dragon sees a human walking with that steady, determined gait, never stopping, always focused on their goal, those ancient instincts are screaming warnings. Warnings about what? Rebecca was checking off her last delivery on her scanner when she heard the sound of wings. Lots of wings. The kind of sound that made the air itself vibrate and sent small pebbles skittering across the ground from the wind pressure. She looked up from her now empty hover cart and stopped walking. The border checkpoint was visible in the distance, maybe half a mile away. She'd made good time despite a few wrong turns. She was actually going to finish this route ahead of schedule, which meant she might actually get home in time to catch the second half of the baseball game her nephew was playing in. But between her and the checkpoint, descending from the sky in a formation that probably looked very impressive if you knew anything about military protocol, were dragons. A lot of dragons. At least 30, maybe more, all wearing formal court regalia, the kind of ornate armor and jewelry that meant these weren't just random citizens. These were important people. In the center, larger than the rest, was a dragon whose scales seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight blue depending on how the light hit them. She wore a crown that looked like it had been carved from a single massive diamond, and her wings, when she landed, spread wide enough to cast a shadow over Rebecca's entire cart. The Empress. Rebecca had seen pictures during her pre-route briefing. You didn't forget a face like that. The entire court landed in a semicircle around Rebecca, completely blocking the path to the checkpoint. For a moment, nobody moved. The dragons all stared at her, and Rebecca had the distinct impression that they were nervous. Which was weird because what did a bunch of giant fire-breathing dragons have to be nervous about? The Empress stepped forward, and Rebecca noticed that despite her massive size, she had to be at least 60 feet tall. There was something almost hesitant in how she moved. Like she was approaching something delicate. Or dangerous. Ms. Harris, the Empress said, her voice deep and resonant. The kind of voice that probably carried across entire battlefields. Might we have a moment of your time? Rebecca glanced at her watch. The game started in 40 minutes. If she got through the checkpoint in the next 10 minutes and didn't hit traffic in the neutral zone, she'd make it. Got about 10 minutes before I'm behind schedule, she said. But sure, what can I help you with? The Empress seemed taken aback by that response. Several of the court dragons exchanged glances. One of them, an older dragon with silver scales, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Kalira. Rebecca remembered the name from the briefing, took what looked like a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, more personal. Ms. Harris, over the past several hours, you have walked through our capital. You delivered your packages. You asked for directions when you needed them. You went about your business with focus and determination. Yes, ma'am, Rebecca said, not sure where this was going. That's pretty much my job. And in doing so, Kalira continued, without intending to, without even being aware of it, you have humbled every dragon you encountered. Warriors who have never retreated from battle found themselves stepping aside. Scholars who have spent centuries studying courage felt fear. Nobles who command fleets experienced an instinct they didn't know they possessed. Rebecca frowned. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Because if I violated some protocol, I apologize. They gave me a briefing, but it was pretty basic and... You did nothing wrong, Kalira interrupted gently. That is precisely the point. You were simply being yourself. Simply doing your job. And that, Ms. Harris, is more frightening than any weapon we've ever faced. Rebecca blinked. She looked around at the assembled dragons, all of whom were watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Fear? Respect? Some mixture of both? Ma'am, she said slowly, I just deliver mail. Exactly, Kalira said, and now there was something that might have been wonder in her voice. You just deliver mail. You have a task and you complete it. Nothing stops you. Nothing distracts you. You simply keep going until the job is done. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is to a species whose instincts tell them to fight hard and then rest? You don't rest, Miss Harris. You don't stop. You just keep coming. Rebecca was starting to feel like she'd walked into the middle of a conversation that had been happening without her. I mean, I stop for lunch, she offered. And I sleep. Everyone needs sleep. Despite everything, despite the tension, despite what was clearly a very serious diplomatic moment, Kalira laughed. It was a surprised sound, almost helpless. Several of the court dragons made similar sounds, the tension breaking like a snapped wire. The Empress extended one massive foreclaw. Resting on it, looking tiny by comparison, was a badge of some kind. It appeared to be made of crystal, maybe diamond, carved with intricate patterns that caught the light. Ms. Harris, on behalf of the Drakavarian Empire and its 400 worlds, I would like to propose an alliance. A formal one. Permanent and binding. Rebecca stared at the badge. An alliance? Ma'am, I'm a mail carrier. I don't really have the authority to. We are aware, Kalira said. This would go through proper diplomatic channels, of course. Treaties would be written. Delegates would negotiate terms. But I wanted to offer this to you first, because you are the reason we're making this offer. She paused. We would also like to discuss the possibility of your postal service expanding routes into our territory. Regular delivery service to our worlds. Rebecca looked from the badge to the Empress to the assembled court. You want mail delivery? Like regular mail delivery? We want, Kalira said carefully, to ensure that humans like you, determined, unstoppable, persistent, are walking with us, not against us. We want your people moving through our space, becoming familiar, becoming normal. We want to work alongside you rather than against you. Rebecca thought about it. She thought about Tom back at the depot, probably worrying about whether she'd made it through okay. She thought about the route she'd just completed, which had honestly been pretty straightforward once she figured out the layout. She thought about the overtime pay that regular routes through Dragon Space would mean, and how the Postal Service was always looking to expand. I'll need to talk to my supervisor Tom about the logistics, she said after exactly 3 seconds of consideration. But yeah, I think we can probably work something out. You folks tip? Because some of these packages are pretty heavy. The entire court went silent. Then Kalira laughed again, louder this time, and the sound was echoed by her advisors and guards. It wasn't mocking laughter. It was the laughter of relief, of tension breaking, of a moment being lighter than anyone expected. We will now, Kalira promised. She held out the crystal badge. Please accept this as a token of our respect and friendship. And thank you, Ms. Harris, for showing us something about ourselves we didn't know. Rebecca took the badge carefully. It was surprisingly light and warm to the touch. You're welcome, I guess? Though I'm still not entirely sure what I did. You were human, Kalira said simply. That was enough. 3 months later, Rebecca's route had expanded considerably. She now delivered to 17 different dragon worlds, each with its own unique architecture and customs. The dragons had been true to their word about tipping. She'd received everything from precious gems to handwritten thank you notes to, on one memorable occasion, a small statue of herself that now sat on her mantle at home. The alliance became official 6 weeks after that first meeting. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchange programs started. Human students began attending Drakavarian universities, and dragon scholars came to Earth to study. And when the Krell swarm, an aggressive insectoid species from the galactic north, decided to test humanity's defenses by attacking a small colony on the border, they got a surprise. Dragon warships arrived before human reinforcements did, appearing through jump gates with weapons hot and shields raised. The battle was over in less than an hour. The Krell commander, being interrogated afterward, asked why the dragons had come so quickly to defend humans. The Dragon Admiral's response became famous throughout the sector. Because Rebecca Harris delivers mail to my sister on Tuesdays, she said. And nobody threatens the mail carrier. Back on Earth, Rebecca heard about the battle on the evening news. She smiled, shook her head, and went back to organizing the next day's deliveries. She had packages to deliver and she'd never missed a deadline yet. She wasn't about to start now.